So chapter 9 is cellular respiration, which is a process similar, it has some similarities to photosynthesis. And there's actually a relationship, if you look at the formulas for them, the inputs to photosynthesis are the outputs to respiration, and the outputs to respiration are the inputs to photosynthesis. So 9.1 starts the chemical pathways, and just a little bit of background. A calorie is the amount of energy needed to raise the temperature of 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius, and the calorie with a capital C on food labels is a kilocalorie or 1,000 calories. Cells don't burn glucose, they release the energy from glucose and from other food components, which in turn gives off energy. We could also use fat or proteins, but we're not going to deal with that in this class. Glycolysis is the first step in the release of food energy, and glycolysis is only going to release a small amount of energy. All right, so glycolysis is always going to be first, whether you have oxygen or whether you don't, but it's only going to release a small amount of energy. In the presence of oxygen, glycolysis leads to two other pathways that lead to a great deal of energy. If there is no oxygen, there's a different pathway used. So when oxygen is present, glycolysis is followed by Krebs and the electron transport chain. That is very important. Okay, so with oxygen, you're going to have the Krebs cycle and electron transport chain, and this process is known as cellular respiration. Now, if we look at it right here, cellular respiration is the process that releases energy by breaking down food molecules in the presence of oxygen. The equation for cellular respiration, 6 oxygen plus 1 glucose, yields 6 carbon dioxides, 6 waters, and ATP, all right, or energy. So that ATP we talked about in the last chapter, we're going to deal with again here. Now, if you look, the formula is written without the amounts, as oxygen plus glucose yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay? So taking a look right here at this diagram, we see that glycolysis is going to occur in the cytoplasm of the cell. And what it's going to do is it's actually going to create some things. First, it's going to make some pyruvic acids, which will go to the Krebs cycle, and it'll have some electron carriers. Remember we talked about those coenzymes, the NADPH? Well, there's another coenzyme here called NADH that goes to the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. Okay, and we'll break that down more specifically in 9.2. Now, respiration does not take place in only one step. It has to be controlled or all the energy would release at once. Glycolysis is the process in which one molecule of glucose is broken in half, producing 2 molecules of pyruvic acid, a 3-carbon compound. So if we think about this, glucose, we know glucose is C6H12O6. So glucose is a 6-carbon compound. So through the process of glycolysis, we're taking that one glucose, the 6-carbon compound, and breaking it into 2 3-carbon compounds called pyruvic acid. This pyruvic acid will then be, where it goes, is determined by the presence or absence of oxygen. Now, glycolysis is a process that's going to release some energy, but it still needs some to get going. At the beginning, 2 molecules of ATP are used, so you have to put in 2 molecules of ATP. So basically what it would be like, it'd be like if you were playing, you were gambling, and you had to put $2 down on the roulette wheel for the spin, and then when you win, you get 4 back, but you only profited 2, right? You started with 2, now you got your 2 back plus 2 more, and that's what's happening here. You put in 2 molecules of ATP, and then these 2 help create 4, okay? So overall, you have 2 net. Net is the number that you end up with after you subtract the amount you invested, okay? So it would be like if you started winter's coming, you started shoveling snow, but you spent $20 to start the business, and then you made $40 shoveling snow. All right, now your profit is $20, not $40. Does that make sense? Because you already spent $20 on supplies. NADH production, one of the reactions of glycolysis, removes 4 high-energy electrons and passes them to a carrier called NAD. Like NAD, P NAD, nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, accepts a pair of electrons and is known as NADH. So really all you need to take from this slide is that NAD is an electron carrier and becomes NADH. Now if we look at this picture of glycolysis, this is what you need to take from it. That glucose goes in and 2 ATP go in, and what comes out is 4 ATP, 2 NADHs, and 2 pyruvic acids. Okay? Now, after glycolysis, if you have no oxygen, fermentation is the release of energy from food molecules in the absence of oxygen. This is the follow-up pathway to glycolysis if no oxygen is present. In fermentation, NADH is converted back into NAD by passing the electrons back to pyruvic acid. This allows glycolysis to continue producing a steady supply of ATP. So you can think of fermentation like washing your dishes. NADH, think of it as a dirty dish. Eventually you run out of dishes, don't you? Fermentation would be like washing those dishes so now that you can continue using them. Okay? It's reclaiming those NADs so that you can keep undergoing glycolysis, which produces ATP. Fermentation itself is not going to result in ATP gain, but it is going to allow you to keep undergoing glycolysis. Now, this term, anaerobic, meaning does not require oxygen. Two main types of fermentation are alcoholic fermentation, which is going to occur with yeast, and lactic acid fermentation, which occurs with us. We undergo lactic acid fermentation. So alcoholic fermentation occurs after glycolysis, so you take that pyruvic acid and that NADH, and you end up with alcohol, CO2, and NAD. And alcoholic fermentation causes bread to rise, that's the CO2 release. Lactic acid fermentation regenerates NAD, so glycolysis can continue. The pyruvic acid that accumulates can be converted to lactic acid, and the formula is pyruvic acid plus NAD yields lactic acid plus NAD. Okay, so lactic acid is what builds up in your muscles during rapid exercise when the body cannot supply enough oxygen to the muscle tissues. Your body cannot produce enough ATP, and that's why this occurs. The buildup of lactic acid is what causes fatigue in muscles. So having that lactic acid build up in your muscles is what causes fatigue. So if you're sprinting all out, your body cannot resupply oxygen to your muscles quickly enough, and thus you are going to start undergoing anaerobic respiration because there's not enough oxygen, and you're going to produce lactic acid as a byproduct.